Welcome to another episode of Come Together. We are live with Professor Chris Reali. How are you today?
I'm
Good
doing
to be
well.
with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Sure, of course. I was doing some homework on some guests that really knew the ins and outs and backgrounds of the music world, and when I saw that you were in Ramapo College, I got really excited. As a local Rockland County, I was born in Valley Hospital. My mom went to Ramapo, and so I got excited about that, and then I was even more excited about everything that you study, and
Yeah,
everything that you
cool,
research.
cool.
So I'm excited to have you here.
Thanks. Yeah, happy to be here.
So, I mentioned I sent you an email yesterday with a couple of things I wanted to talk about, and you said that each of those topics were, worthy of several hours worth of conversation.
Indeed, indeed.
Um, and I wanted to talk to you about the business of music because I've done a lot recently about particular artists or particular genres, and I kind of want to get into a little bit of the nuance of how the business works because the industry is known as a pretty tough industry for the artists, very cutthroat as far as trying to make it yourself. And if you can maybe give me just a little bit of background on how the introduction to this industry it would be, that'd be awesome.
Well, I guess the question, what kind of perspective do you want? Because there's so the industry is huge, right?
Mhm.
And there's also like there's if we divide it into a dichotomy, like there's the artist side, and then there's like what gets called the label side, and there's more than that. So
Right.
what perspective are
Oh,
you looking?
that's a great question. Thank you for asking. Okay, for asking to elaborate. I'd be curious first from the artist side. If you're an artist and you're trying to make it as a musician, and I know that historically you would probably start by playing local bands, trying to get someone to, or local gigs, trying to get someone to recognize you, and then essentially try to get a record printed. At least historically, that was the way that you got started.
True. Yeah. So that is very true. So um, up until well, I mean that's still kind of the case. So um the modern music industry, I would say, started roughly, we could call it 100 years ago. Roughly with a little before that, obviously Edison invents the recording technology in the 1800s, and then it doesn't really take off till roughly the 1920s.
Mhm.
Although a lot of major labels have their roots that go back over 100 years, so they get very, very deep pockets. Yeah, so artists, yeah, so you would do some local gigs, play some cover songs likely, and then you would hopefully attract local following, and try to create a buzz, and that's still the case to this day. But there are very few, and then if you had enough of a buzz, maybe someone from a label would hear about you somehow, and they'd come see a live show, and that position is called an A&R, artist and repertoire. They don't totally exist that much anymore. There are very few people who like it was usually guys lurking in the back of the club, trying to hear trying to hear potential in a band. Those positions exist, but not so much anymore. A lot of the stuff happens via social media, uh, although the labels have kind of soured on signing someone who's blown up on via TikTok, because they realize that they virality on TikTok or any social media platform doesn't necessarily translate to butts and seats. So again, you play gigs, and then if you were, hopefully, you maybe sign a record deal, and those deals were rather onerous, back in the day, and this goes back, up through roughly the early 2000s. You'd sign maybe a 6 or 7 record deal if you're working at a major label. So,
That's
um,
considered a lot, right? 6 or 7 records is probably
yeah,
10
yeah.
years worth of work for.
Yeah, and or more, and each and back then they would typically refer to like what we call album cycles, and so album cycles are not years. Album cycles are like basically like a song gets released or the album gets released or a single gets released and the album, and then you work the album, and it could be
Mhm.
an album cycle could be 3 years.
Sure.
So, because it's basically when they say, "Yeah, you know what? We've milked this thing as much as possible," and the artist go, "I'm gonna take a break," and they go record and then do it again. So, again, your 6 or 7 album deal could literally be, at least 10 years. And
Mhm.
often back in the day, one of the things that happened, you knew someone was leaving a label when all of a sudden the greatest hits came out, and that was pretty typical. That was really standard. That was like always typical, and it might be a bonus track, like greatest hits typically meant the end of the contract. So that was what happened back in the day. Now, artists are way more savvy and they're releasing, single albums and the deals of the structure of the deals has changed quite a bit. So there's been a lot more, information flowing to artists, and, yeah, so artists are aware that, like, ownership of your intellectual property is the biggest thing, right?
Yeah.
So, despite the fact that the industry has changed quite a bit from, like, we've gone from physical media to digital world, the basic principle of the industry has never changed, and it's copyright ownership, and so that is at the heart of everything, and so who owns the copyright? And so in a recording, there are 2 copyrights. So there was the copyright for the recording, and there's a copyright for the sheet music, and although most people don't deal in sheet music anymore, but that was basically how that was the sheet music was a huge part of the music industry up until the 1960s and 70s, even maybe beyond.
Because I was considered exclusive?
No, it's not so exclusive because the copyright is enshrined in it's a constitutional right, and copyright is both the most basic thing and the most complex thing in the world. So, like, so I take a picture on my phone or my camera, I have a copyright, right? So that's it. So the copyright is the right to copy. That is basically what it means. And then if you want to register your copyright with the U.S. government, which you do that through the Library of Congress, that costs money, right?
Mhm.
And so what happens is that if you wanna when you sign a record deal, so if I assign you to my label, so you write the songs, you have to then transfer ownership to me because I can't release them without your permission, and the only way to do that is to transfer them to me, and so in exchange for that, I would give you a royalty,
Mhm.
and the royalty rates are negotiable, but there was a limit on what, the government says there's a minimum of what you can collect.
Gotcha.
Again, and there's lots of nuance, and obviously, the more famous you are, the more you've been successful, the higher
Mhm.
your royalty would be, potentially. And royalties are different. There's also, as people have discussed, like, oh, Spotify pays 0.000 whatever, but there is no per stream rate, and so royalties depend on, there's different royalty rates for recorded media, there's different royalty rates for digital media, so it all depends, and so it's really complicated.
Gotcha.
So and then there's also royalty for the songwriter. So, again, if you are the songwriter and the recording artist, you might get paid 2 different ways. And so, again, that knowledge that's always been the case, but I think a lot more artists know that. And so going back to, deals, like, so a lot more artists are like, "Yeah, you know what? I don't wanna sign a long-term record deal with it. I just want you to I need a label to promote me," because that's kind of what major labels really do is that they help you get above the din, right? Because there's literally hundreds of thousands of songs a day released. How does someone find your song? It is worse than a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
And so but major labels can help with that, and so can independent labels too, and it also depends on the style of music. So,
Right. Right, right, right. It's so funny to and interesting to think about because it really is I mean, first of all, just the aspect of there's so many different avenues and ways for, streams of money to be coming in and going. Would you think that part of the reason why it's so complicated is because artists tend to be less business oriented or savvy, and so this would
yeah.
find other ways around kind of getting them the full, as much as they probably could earn?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just typically, artists have not been that savvy on the business side,
Yeah,
and they've got screwed, and historically, people of color, and women have got screwed, and I mean, there's lots of documentation about that, so,
yeah.
and it's
I
and
mean,
it
I can't help think about the whole Springsteen debacle with Mike Appel
yeah,
and, I mean, the fa and go to your point about owning the song, I thought this was interesting as you were saying it. He fought so hard to have, the rights to the Born to Run album and, the other albums that he wrote before that, and I think just a couple of years ago, he ended up selling the whole his all his rights to Sony, I believe, right? For
yeah,
like
yeah,
800 million or
yeah,
$1 billion, something crazy like
it was
$800 million.
600,000,000, yeah, roughly. Yeah,
Yeah.
so, again, I mean, yeah, so ownership is really crucial, right? So, if your song gets placed in a movie or a television show, I mean, like,
Sure.
that can be a very lucrative payday if you
Huh?
own that. I mean, there's obviously lots of examples of artists who are, like, quote unquote, like, they were top of the chart and they were broke
Yeah.
because they signed very poor deals. And again, and not no fault of their own. Someone's like, "Hey, listen, just sign this deal. Listen,
Sure.
we'll give you $100,000 right now, and don't worry about the back end." And you're like, "Oh, back end, what's that on?" And again, so you get cash up front. This happened a lot in the early R&B days in the '50s, where again someone would give you 200 or $500, which was a lot of money back then. But again,
Yeah.
but knowing that copyright lasts very literally at this point, copyright it's the life of the author plus 70. So that is basically like,
Hey everyone, real quick, if you're enjoying the show, click subscribe and rate the show 5 stars. Helps a ton. Thanks so much.
it is 150 years basically, depending how long you live.
Yeah, yeah.
And the owners of those songs, whether it's the label or the publishing company or both, they are making money for a long time. And again, that's what was at the heart of Taylor Swift's, complaint with Big Machine and Scooter Braun is like, I want to own my masters, and then she found this loophole, right? So
Mhm.
by recording stuff, and because she did that, every major label has made more or less wall that off. That'll never happen again,
Yeah.
right? Because she outsmarted them, which is great, good for her.
Yeah.
But that whole thing was basically about money as well. It was about artistic control, and I know the Swifties are gonna come after me, but for this, but it's true. I mean, she had artistic control, but she also wanted money, and she's allowed entitled to make that. So,
The Swifties are everywhere. You can't you
yeah,
can't escape
yeah.
them.
Listen, she's an amazing businesswoman, right? She's a
She
really
is.
very talented songwriter and a very talented performer too. Like, again, no
She's
all credit
incredible. She's incredible. There's no
all
question
credit to
about it. And the hate that she gets, I think is more than a little silly. And I think that anyone that does the amount of work that she does and puts the amount of effort that she puts into anything deserves an enormous amount of respect, whether or not you appreciate the art.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm totally about that.
I tell all my music students, my business students is like, "Listen, you don't have to like her, but you need to pay attention to what she does because
Yeah,
she moves the needle, right? You don't have to
yeah.
like her music, and that it doesn't matter, right? In the business of music, it is not about who is better or best. That's subjective, right? The artist who, quote, unquote, "wins the industry" is the one who sells the most records. So, and right now, it's basically her and BTS are winning,
Yeah.
you know?
Are you familiar with the podcast called The Town with Matt Bellany?
I'm
He's
not.
a Ho he's a Hollywood guy, but, there was, he does cute episodes, and he's a big insider. He gets, Netflix's CEOs and Sony CEOs and AMC CEO, and, like, he gets a lot of big people, to interview, short 30, 40-minute segments, and he had this conversation with a bunch of people more than once. If you had to pick up the phone for, like, Bob Iger or the CEO of Netflix or Taylor Swift, they're like, "We're picking up the phone for Taylor Swift every
Right.
single time,"
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
that anything that she touches is gonna turn to absolute gold. But
yeah,
it's crazy to hear everyone say that. Like, her
yeah,
reach is really incredible.
it is.
You mentioned, earlier that, that the standard that the way that record companies would find artists has shifted, and that you said that TikTok and online presence doesn't necessarily put butts in seats. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. Again, part of that was pandemic, right? So looking for the next big thing, and yes, of course, labels look at your social footprint, right? They're gonna want they wanna know what your fan base is, and that and your social footprint gives them an indication.
Mhm.
And so, again, you could have a global following on either Instagram or, I know most people don't most people who are upcoming don't use Facebook or TikTok, but, if you have 10 million followers on Instagram, right, which is an enormous amount of people, but if they're scattered across the globe and you wanna do a show in New York City and you only have, even 15,000 followers in New York City, and again, you can atomize that. You can there are platforms that look, that say, "There's where," you can literally go down and say, almost to the block level,
Yeah.
right? And so, but that doesn't necessarily mean that if you do a show at, a club in Brooklyn or a club in the city, that they're gonna show up. And
Mhm.
so labels realize that you could peop or so you again, you might have this viral moment and it's and so again, trying to get the fans out of their house into your show, or there's that, and also, like, there's no second song, right? So, like, you've got this really awesome one song, but
Yeah.
you don't have another 50 songs ready to go. Like, I spent all my time working on this one song to have it go viral, and then I don't have anything else in my tank,
Yeah.
right? And because of, virality. I mean, virality is more or less manufactured at this point, right? It's almost really hard to get that to go organic. But
Mhm.
either way, again, you need to have what is your second song, right? So I mean, like, there's a famous line that's often attributed to Elvis Costello, although he doesn't recall saying this. Is like you have your entire life to write your first record. You have 6 months to write your second one, and so I think labels realize that again they would easily cash in. They pluck an artist off of TikTok, they dump some money into it to blow it up even more, and then they would extract some wealth from there, and the artist made some money too, and then they move on to somebody else. And so,
Right.
how many artists have been signed and have had sustained career growth through either TikTok, even, even YouTube. I know Bieber just played, Coachella, and then, he there's you could count on one hand the amount of artists who've actually, like, blown up because of social media and have had a career had a long time career after that.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
it's again, you can use the platform to get attention, but to sustain that attention, you need to have the talent as well.
Sure.
So, and so that's kinda what I mean. So, and it's obviously a combination of all that. So, do you have a social presence? Do you have a show? Do you have passionate fans who are willing to come see you on a Tuesday night at midnight, in some podunk town somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what needs to happen, right? So
Yeah.
is this a sustainable career?
It's really interesting. It's really cool. I feel like going forward in the next couple of years, the music business is gonna switch into it's gonna, I mean, further, come apart, and there's gonna be an industry of live music, and festivals and, and live performing bands, and then there's gonna be the industry of the online presence and the studios and the digital/real world, and I know it kind of already is, but I know that historically, they were always tied together. Like you said, an album used to was easily, you'd single, like you said, release the album, and then spend anywhere between 6 months and a year and a half or whatever it is, touring that album, all over the as often as you can. That expectation is not really there anymore, and you don't really have the same kind of, like, Springsteen River Tour, or, Bob Dylan, whatever tour they whatever, I guess he does a little bit more, sporadically, but the Grateful Dead would tour albums, or whoever it was. Um, that's not an obligation anymore to make it as an artist these days, and,
Yeah.
maybe I'm wrong. That's just, what I feel like from what I consume.
Well, so, when I talk about so I teach classes about the music industry, and so I talk about there are basically like 7 aligned mini universes, right? So often I tell, so when people think about the music industry, especially people who don't know about the business side, they often think about the recording artist, right? So, like, for many people, the face of the industry are people like BTS or Beyonce or Taylor Swift,
Right.
because they see the recording artist. But in reality, it's way bigger than that. And
Okay.
so there's the recording industry, right? And a lot of this overlaps, right? There's the publishing industry, there's the live industry, um I know there's brick and mortar stores, so there's retail, so there's music education. So, I tell my students, you are part by taking these classes, you are part of the music industry. Like, as I taught middle school band, I was
Right.
part of the music industry. So there's a very broad universe. So, that's why I asked you earlier, well, like, what aspect you wanna talk about, because the answer depends on how we're framing this. So, yes, artists would typically go out and, you get signed to a deal, and you promote a single. Hopefully, the single got to radio, and so now radio is not as important anymore. Again, in my day, and maybe it's part of your day too, like, getting a song on, WPLJ
Sure.
or WNEW was a big, if it's a rock thing, or, if it was a rapper or army thing on Hot 100, or whatever. And again, and they had a huge reach, right? And millions of people heard those songs at the same time.
Yeah.
And so now people are trying to get songs onto playlists, and there were these a lot of gate there were lots of gatekeepers on the radio, right? There are still lots of gatekeepers on streaming platforms. And then artists would go out and try to make some money, and they would so the record sales didn't actually make money. And
Mhm.
there was a time where record sales did make some money. Again, obviously, if when you start selling Michael Jackson numbers, like, for Thriller, or I Will Always Love You by Whitney Houston, like, those, they made lots of money because those
Yeah.
records sold in the tens of millions,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so the one of the major impacts of the pandemic was obviously that sort of shut down all the live stuff, and so that's how a lot of artists still were making money, and then still make money, because streaming income is a trickle, but again, there are lots of mid-level artists who are pulling, 30,000 streamers, 30,000 listeners a month,
Yeah.
and making a living by doing it, and making it, is it a good living? Ends, right? But you can go play a show and you walk out with the cash in hand,
Sure.
right? Or again, you play a show at the Garden, right? You're gonna walk up with millions of dollars. That again, there's lots of expenses. Don't get me wrong, but and at the end, depending how the artist lives, you could actually you could do one arena tour, again, if you're that level, every couple of years, and you are gonna never have to work, never have a real job again, right? But that is very far in between. Most artists are are working at the pub level, right? So they're playing breweries, they're playing, the small 300 seat clubs or 300 capacity clubs, you know? And so but again, you can still do pretty well there too. And so the idea is having numerous revenue streams coming at the same time. So, like, I could go on tour, play some shows. I mean, I will have some money flowing in from, if from my songwriting and or my recordings. Also know that, again, most people don't realize this, that recording royalties and publishing royalties take about almost a year to get to you. So
Whoa.
you release a song to
Really?
yeah, you release a song today, and it could be number 1, right? And then you actually don't get paid. It just takes us so long. Now granted,
Why?
it's opaque by nature, right? So it is so, like, I write songs, and I have stuff, I have, a couple albums out, and I have some stuff trickling in, and, like, I get my latest royalty statement was from BMI, 'cause I'm a BMI member. BMI is a performing rights organization, they're not a publisher. My publisher is Song Trust, and I think I got paid, it's about a year ago. Like, the music what I get paid for now is stuff that was played about a year ago. It's why? It's because it's opaque, it's really challenging to, like, the accounting to, like, trace the song, right, where did it come from, and then finally have it trickle down and, now granted, if you're with a major label and so you release a song and it blows up, it becomes number 1, and it's and you are if you, the artist, are like, "Hey, listen, I'm eating chicken McNuggets here. I wanna have a steak. Can you lend me some money based on royalties?" They will say, "Yes." You could say, "We'll give you X amount of money," and then when the royalties come in, we will keep that back. We will retain that, but we'll give you money, but we've already paid you for that, and that happens all the time, right?
Right.
You get an advance on your royalties. I don't know if you're familiar with there's a case now where Limp Bizkit's suing Universal Music Group because they said, "You owe us back royalties," and, like, they're suing them for, like, I don't know, like, $50 million.
Whoa.
And UMG was like, "We gave you that money. You signed the deal. We gave
Yeah.
you a $50 million advance, and you have not recouped. You have not earned back the money. So you took that money up front, and we have kept everything else because the."
Wow.
So
Crazy.
it's kinda like a loan system, it's not a bank loan. It's kinda
Yeah,
like a loan.
sure, sure. Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
know people I know people that are in the commercial mortgage industry that the same thing that they say their salary, quote unquote, is really a loan from the bank until they close a deal, and then they have to pay back their salary. So you want actually hypothetically as low of a salary as possible because, you don't really care about, you want you're waiting for that deal, and so and then you'll pay back whenever you pay back, but, at the moment, you get by. Exactly.
yeah,
That's real
yeah.
I I did a podcast with a gentleman, I forgot his name now, but he wrote a book called The Economic History of the Grateful Dead,
Okay.
and he was able to just tracking their receipts and just going through their books, was able to track their success, and they were kinda known as a touring band. Um, what do you think of the touring industry um, as it's bounced back from COVID in recent years. Are you hopeful for it? Do you think that it's going strong still? Or you think that there's anomalies that people will go out for, but generally don't really care? What's your feel about it?
Well, I mean, touring has certainly bounced back post-COVID. I mean, what I'm concerned primarily, and I'm not the only one, is just the ticket prices are so expensive.
Insane.
And I know my first show I saw was Cardi B, and Nash in, like, 1984, 85, and I think the ticket was $12. Now granted, like, and so my ticket in '85 is my $12 ticket in '85 does not account to $500 in 2026. Like, there's a lot of things happening, and I know how I know how this works, and I know there's a lot of people taking a cut.
Yeah.
But what I think most people don't realize is that as artists don't make that much money on the record side anymore. They're trying to, make up that deficit on the live side. Again, and that's fine. I have lots of students who go see shows all the time, and I'm like, "How do you afford this?" I barely go to see any show because I
I
can't.
can't go. I
Yeah.
see cover band. I see local cover bands now instead, pretty
Yeah,
much.
I can't as much as I'd like to see some, there's a few, like, living legends I just see 'em, like, I'm not they're not worth spending me having me spend
Yeah.
$1,000 on it. I was like, "That's just not happening." And, again, also and then as someone who's also worked in the touring side, I'm like, I saw so many shows for free, I'm kinda like, "I don't wanna pay for these shows anymore because I saw so many shows for free." So,
It's hard too.
yeah, yeah, and so I would rather go see I'm not a huge fan of cover bands, but that's a whole nother thing. But like, I'd rather go see a local musician, doing their thing and give
That
them
too. I love live local
yeah,
musicians.
yeah. So yeah, it is hopeful, and obviously there's the case against Live Nation just went to the jury or is about to go to the jury, and we'll see what happens. Um, Ticketmaster is not they're not I mean, they're not saints, and, neither them nor Live Nation are saints, but they're also not the entire enemy. A lot of the artists are complicit in these fees and the ticket prices. The artist sets the price, right? The
Right.
artist said, "I need." I mean, it is the math is very basic in some ways. If I can make it really reductionist, it's like, okay, the artist says, "I need to have $1 million for my night." Okay, great. And so then the promoter says, "We take this arena, and we say we divide the how many seats are there by what the artist wants, and that's sort of how we get to the ticket price. So the higher the fees, the higher the artists. Like then you say, well, that goes and that goes into the ticket price. Obviously, if when you go see a show, like I often reference Travis Scott did the Astroworld tour a couple years ago, like, he had a Ferris wheel on stage, right? So there was a lot of production value. There was a lot of shit on stage, like, "Oh, this is insane," right? It's like, they spent a lot of money and brought a
Yeah,
circus-like atmosphere, right? You're like, so there's a lot of money in that. But when you go see an artist is again, I know you're obviously a fan of Springsteen. Like, Springsteen plays a long time, right? But, like, it's a fairly no-frills production, right? 'Cause it's just
sure.
some jumbotrons, and, like, again, that nothing wrong with that, but, and not that that doesn't cost money, but, like, if you just go see someone stand on stage and there's not much happening, like, as far as, like, lights or pyrotechnics, like, why am I spending $1,000 a ticket on this, right? Because
Yeah.
because, because some of that money obviously goes to pay the crew and the production costs and all that stuff. So, there's a lot of factors involved, so.
You think that if an artist in order to for the artist to get $1,000,000, let's say he sells at a stadium, he needs $30 a ticket, how much do you think, a consumer is gonna end up paying at the end of the day? You think 60, $70? As in, do you think the artist probably takes 50% of the
Yeah,
ticket value?
well, I mean, the Led Zeppelin, Peter Grant was Led Zeppelin's manager.
Yeah.
He more or less established the split is basically 90-10. So the band so whatever's made at a show,
Okay.
right? Again, when you we so I'm not talking about some local cover band at,
Sure.
at a pub or whatever. It's like you're playing a show that, again, Madison Square Garden or Newark or, it's like the artist typically gets 90% of what comes in, right? So, but that's, so there's a guarantee, and then there is, they get a cut. The artist gets a cut of obviously the merch sales, but the house gets a cut of the merch sales. The artist can also get a cut of the liquor sales if that's in there as well. So there's other ways that artists make money. And then, so yeah, so again, the artist says, I need X $5 million guarantee or whatever, and then, as I said, they just sort of work backwards. But the artist also,
Yeah.
again, but beyond the guarantee, the artist and their team make money from very many different avenues as well.
Right.
So again, so their $5 million might 7 million at the end of the night or whatever. So, and again, and that does that justify the ticket fee? Does that justify high ticket costs? I don't think so.
I
So
I I I tend to agree. I tend to agree. What if I wanna get into the music industry and I am not, I like music and I'm okay at playing, but, I would love to get into the business component, the business side of things. And I wanna deal with the creatives, but I'm not on the stature of, performing myself. What would you say is like a typical journey for someone in that situation?
well, actually, there's way more choices. So again, I have a little thing on my desk when students come in, like, "I wanna be in the music industry," and, like, and so they're like, they always, they typically wanna work with a major artist, and that's great, and I said, "Go for that." But there's so many different ways to enter into the music industry. So, so obviously, the more quote unquote glamorous jobs are like maybe being artist manager, right? So, but there's one side of that. So then, but there are, I have a lot of students who actually wind up working in social media or marketing for a label, and they might be in charge or work for, a marketing app, if you're working at a label, like a label might oversee a label. Let's say a label has 50 different artists, right?
Yeah.
And there's not 50 different people working individually.
Ah, right.
There's a team that works with these 10 artists, right? And so there's that, and so they handle the social media, and not every artist is firing at the same time, right? So, like, sometimes they're off, sometimes they're on the road, sometimes they're off the road. So there's that. There are people who are rock and roll accountants, right? So all they do is handle the accounting
Yeah.
for because it's complex, right? There and there's lots of funky loopholes and ways to try to ways to manage your money. You know, that you could, you know, at a certain level, you might have you could be a business manager just managing the money for people who are creatives, right? And that's a very lucrative business because you're looking at lots of zeros in that. There are people who just there are rock and roll caterers, right? And I use the word rock and roll broadly here. So you go on tour and you're like, there are the people will go and like you will bring a team of chefs with you and they're cooking for the band and the crew and you know, and it could be, you know, that again, that costs significant money, but again, there are people who are travel agents, all they do is book tours, right? So they book the travel for the tour, like,
That's cool.
yeah, because right, artists are quirky, and so there are hotels that sort of cater to artists, you know, or there, you know, there's that too. I mean, some of this happens, as when I was a tour manager, I did a lot of this myself, but there are people you can reach out to, you know, so there's all different there's a lot of non-music jobs that actually happen in the music industry that people don't think about. You want to own a venue, right? So there's someone
Yeah,
a commercial landlord, I own a building and I have a recording studio there or recording studios there, right? So, a friend of mine, she makes reeds for oboes, right? It's like so, like, I mean, she was a music faculty, but her side hustle was making reeds for oboes. So so there's so many different ways in there, and as I said, most people think about the artist first and think that's the entryway, but
yeah,
I often say Taylor Swift, she. There was one Taylor Swift or Beyonce or Bieber, they probably employ directly at least a dozen people and indirectly thousands of people
sure.
because of the way the money flows.
Yeah, yeah. I teach high school English. I tell my students this all the time. Like, they're like, "Oh, well," like, they love entertainment or love movies or love music. I'm like, "Well, I can't, I'm never gonna be an actor." I'm like, "Dude, you don't need to be an actor, man." Like, I interviewed a gentleman named Joel High, who's a music supervisor,
Oh, cool.
and yeah, and his job is one of the coolest freaking jobs in the world, and it's he will either deal with creating the score or he'll deal with getting the rights to particular
Right.
songs, and,
Yeah.
and a lot of times artists will demand to see the scenes of the movies before
Right.
they approve to be like,
Right.
"I wanna make sure that that my song's not being used in a crappy movie."
Correct. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah,
so
music supervision is a big deal. That's called music sync. That's called sync. You need like so if you get your song synced, which means the music is synced with a motion picture wagon, whether it's film, television, or
sure.
online. Right. So yeah, and there that is basically the Wild West because there's so for recordings there's what's called the statutory rate to get paid, but in the sync world, so if you want I often use like the James Bond films as the examples because I know Adele's done it, Billie Eilish or Paul McCartney did a lot of people have done these big name films, and you get you get a flat fee. You say, "Hey, Adele, we're gonna give you $1,000,000 just to record the song, and then you can get money every time it gets played, every theater, and there's different rights for if it goes on television, there's different rights if it goes on DVD, and
That's crazy.
because there's no statutory rate, it can be a very, very, very lucrative payday, right? Again, it's I have a lot of students who are musicians like, "Oh, I wanna get into sync licensing." It's like, "Great," but you have to create relationships. It's not you don't just, like, send a song to somebody randomly, "Hey, place my song in," insert name of TV show here. It doesn't work that way. I mean, it could, but it's pretty rare. So, but yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so music supervision again, and if you have if you have a successful track record of like getting a hit show on insert, whatever the streaming platform or Netflix or HBO, and like then all of a sudden you become a very hot property, and then
Yeah.
because you're able to negotiate the deals because there's a lot of negotiation going on for that, and again you need to know. You as the artist need to know what the going rate is, and there is no going rate, which makes it very challenging. So you could say, "Oh man, they took my song for $50,000, like that's great," and like, but the supervisor's like, "Oh, we would have given you 100,000, but you didn't ask for it." So like,
Yeah.
and so it's really hard. So
I feel like that's always been the artist's problem. The artist's problem is that you're throwing them into I mean, I think it's just the problem of the innocent versus the institutions is usually what it is. I mean, you can make the same argument about colleges for a lot of people, you're throwing them in and having them sign up for $250,000 of debt before they even know what they're talking about.
true, yeah, yeah, yeah. Again, going back to the whole industry is opaque, and again, so a lot of these deals are. especially in the sync world, a lot of the, or even recording deals, right? These are proprietary things, and so these are not public documents. And
Yeah,
so if you're not in the if you don't move in those circles, right? In the sync world, then you're likely going to undersell the first time you get a big sync deal, you're likely going to undersell it. And again, as long, but if at the end of the day, if you are happy, so hey, listen, I got this thing that someone gave me 10 grand and I made $10,000 in one day,
yeah,
right? I mean, forget about how long it took you to make it. Like, that's a pretty good payday. I think anybody would take a $10,000 for one day. Like, and with the potential of making money on the royalty side too. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and you earn.
And, it was really cool though because I was even thinking the example that you gave about writing a song for a movie, right? Like, I think was it Shakira that did, Zootopia?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And so you're saying that the structure of the deal would be that we're gonna pay you X amount to record it, and then whenever people buy this Zootopia record, or a physical vinyl on Barnes& and Noble, you get X, Y, and Z cut, and every time that it's streamed and it's licensed out on Disney Plus or Hulu, whatever it is, you're gonna make
correct,
another cut there.
correct.
Cool, and then but then there's also the and I've heard I've heard stories or interviews with people where they'd be like, they're an artist and then, they had mild success and then they just disappeared for about 10 years, kept on living their lives, and then someone knocked on the door and said, "Hey, we want your song for X, Y, and Z movie or TV show," and all of a sudden their entire career just jumps back,
Correct.
gets jump started.
Well, yeah, so, that's Kate Bush with Running Up a Hill, right? So, that if the first, Stranger Things, right?
Right.
Kate Bush, right? So highly respected, incredibly talented, artist, right? Sort of, very doesn't do much in the public eye, right? And then that song, it gets landed in Stranger Things. So, like, so getting a song in Stranger Things, I would have been like that again. That's like almost a golden ticket.
Yeah.
So that's and that song went back on the charts, and and she again, if depending how what and how much she owns of that song, I hope it's all of it. She could have had a very lucrative payday. The same thing happened with that TikTok video with "In Dreams" by the Fleetwood Mac many years ago about the guy.
Yes.
Right, so I mean, that song and album didn't need any more help, but, like, it went back in the charts again,
Right.
right? So,
I was
um
so excited when people when I saw it popping up on social media again. I was like, "I'm so happy that this is making another round," you know?
right, yeah. Yeah, I remember telling my students, again, going back to the Kate Bush thing, like, again, some of the songs in that and we only watched a couple episodes of Stranger Things, but, like, a lot of those songs that they played, like, they were really obscure songs in the '80s to begin with, and I as someone who grew up in the '80s, again, not that I didn't obviously wasn't I'm not all-knowing about the '80s, but I was like, she was known, but these were left of center songs, right? These were not pop hits, so I'm glad that someone found her song and said and it worked perfectly for that move for that series. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and so people's careers can all of a sudden, it's what's called mailbox money. So a song that you recorded years ago, someone decides to put into a movie, and then all of a sudden you're like, "Oh, damn!" I was like, "Where did? Oh, cool!" And a friend of mine who was a rapper and lives in North Carolina, like, he said one of his songs somehow got included in American Idol, like, as one of the as a bumper, like, one of the it was played, like, during as, like, leading up to a commercial break, and he's like, "I have no idea." He's like, "The checks just started rolling in, and he
Wow.
still have no idea who did this," but he's like, "I'm very thankful to them."
Incredible,
Yeah.
incredible, so cool. Do you know anything about and then I wanna ask maybe this last topic, and then I wanna switch to a little bit of about rock and roll and actual the music history, but, um, I feel like it'd be crazy not to try to talk about, the companies Spotify or Apple Music or these big streaming platforms like YouTube Music and, Amazon. How do those business models work? And I I don't even understand, really how they work very much. I've read a book or 2 about Spotify, the company. I don't know if I completely understood all the details, and I don't entirely understand they had a lot of, like, artist rebellions against them too over the years. Can you maybe, talk a little bit about that if you're familiar with it?
Yeah, so streaming, right, is,
Streaming came from
streaming is
LimeWire. I
no,
remember
no, no, no,
growing
no, no,
up.
no, no, it goes way back. So radio is a streaming technology.
Okay, right, right.
Right. So, and as when I teach the history of streaming, like people, I realize it's like it doesn't. Spotify did not invent streaming, right? The radio is a streaming device. There's on-demand streaming, and then there is the phrase left me, but like so basically like there is radio is there is interactive and non-interactive. That's it. So non-interactive is like the radio, like, you cannot
Right.
change the song. They just play the song, and you can request a song, but, like, it just plays and you just have no choice.
Right.
Interactive is like, I get to pick the song. So, Spotify and most streaming services operate on either one of those models, but there's also SiriusXM, right? And there's Pandora. So, like, Pandora and, you can interact with Pandora and have it change, so and but SiriusXM is also non-interactive, like, you cannot suggest a song, they just play stuff for you. And so and all those and, those all those different mediums and the way and the they all pay out at different rates. So obviously Napster paved the way for what
Right.
became Spotify, right? So Napster short-lived. Napster did not invent the MP3. They were invented by these brainiac German dudes who had worked a long time on what's called psychoacoustics, and they eventually they inherited this. They inherited this one guy inherited the problem from his mentor, and they cracked the code and basically figured out how to compress these files and to make them sound, just make them sort of transportable, make the file small enough, but still sound enough. And so that happened, and they developed the MP3 technology, which allowed Napster to actually go crazy because they developed a platform to share those things. And so then Apple comes in and Apple says, I mean, there were numerous streaming platforms in around the 20s, around 2000, right? Owned by different labels, and people, most consumers don't give a shit what
Mhm.
label your artist is on, right? They just want the music. And so then Apple came in and said, we're gonna solve that, and we have Apple through iTunes, and
And
then
some
everyone,
individual songs. I remember I
right,
used
yeah,
to pay for a
and
dollar a
they,
song or whatever.
right, no, that's a song, and everyone's like, "Oh, Apple solved our problem," right? And so and then what, 2011 is when Spotify launches in the US, but they start in Scandinavia in Sweden in 2009, roughly. Spotify starts off as, like, they don't know what they're gonna sell. They're basically an advertising platform. That's what Daniel Ek's background is, like, it's advertising, and they didn't know what they were gonna do, and they kinda stumbled upon music as a thing, and they realized that the technology would work, and so, it didn't really matter. It was almost like a widget, like, "We don't care what we sell, developed this platform and figured out, and they figured out on music. And then obviously took them a while to get the licensing deals and going on. And, then but also at the same time, right, that's when labels were really suffering. They're sort of like CDs had declined. And I know that labels blame piracy, but I don't buy that. The
No?
math just doesn't add up. Yes, again, what Napster did was illegal, right? Again, at the end of the day, it was copyright. They don't own the right. They don't have the, you don't own it, you can't give it away, right?
Right.
And so they basically that was the crux of what that was brought down their short-lived empire. So again, yes, did labels lose money? Absolutely. Is it the same? Are the figures that their Recording Industry Association of America, are those accurate? Probably not. I don't think it's anywhere near that. Anyway, so the labels are happy to have Spotify and Apple, or Apple and Spotify, like, sort of solve their issue of how do we get people to listen to more music. Um,
So initially they thought it was like a extended marketing opportunity.
yeah, absolutely. And,
Right.
yes, you alluded to that a lot of artists are very upset with Spotify, and that is legit, but they should be the artists should be upset with the record labels, because the record labels are the ones that signed the deals, right?
So why were they upset with Spotify? Can you
Well,
clarify
bec
that?
yeah, sure, because the payouts are very small, right? Again, as I said, that it's, 0.000 whatever, right? So per stream. So, couple things, right? So that is entirely true. The payout is small, and again, there is no set rate. Apple and Spotify and Amazon, they don't pay any per rate. It's not a pro rata model. The system is very complicated, um, and the numbers that people use are averages. So so but the one thing that is good is, so in the old model, you buy a record, right? So you don't see, like, I have thousands of CDs around my office, and, like, you buy a record and it's $10, right? So
Mhm.
back when I first started buying CDs, they were $18, right? So and so that's what it was. We used $10. So I bought the record, and it was your record, and so you got some kind of royalty for my, and I could listen to the album a million times, right?
Right.
But you only got paid once.
Right.
Right, so the bonus of the current system is that,
Interesting.
and so
Cool.
now every time I listen to a song on whatever
Right.
platform, someone's getting paid, right? The
Right.
artist's still getting a trickle, right? But again, but legacy artists, right? So again, someone so a legacy artist is someone either the band is no longer because someone's dead or they broke up or what all the above, right? So that there's still money flowing into the catalog of the Beatles, right? So we know that, or Michael Jackson or Sam Cooke, whoever, because the music's out there, right? And so whoever owns those rights are still making money from that catalog. Again, which and so that is a good thing, right? But it was the small payouts that people were very upset at. Like they're looking at like my song was streamed 1,000 times, and I literally made 42 bucks, and, if 10,000 people bought my album as an independent artist, that's an impressive number. 10,000 is impressive no matter what. I mean, I have some students, like, they get, like, 30,000 streams a year, which is,
That's a
again
lot.
yeah, it is. I mean, they're not making any money from that, but,
Yeah.
that's an impressive number. I'm like,
If
"Be
you had an
happy."
audience of 30,000, that is
Right.
exceptional, you
Right,
know?
as someone who lives in Bergen County or somewhere
Sure.
or in Rocky, like, that's like, "Holy shit, that's
Yeah.
cool. 30,000 people love my music. That's awesome."
Yeah.
Right? But, like, then you look at your old streaming like, "Oh, I made $1,000." Right? Which is, you can't which is you that's not even a car payment, right? So,
If I
like
got 30 if I got 30 thou if I got 30,000 streams, can I go to a venue and say, "I would love to play. Here's evidence that people listen to my music and that it's good music."
Yeah,
Does that
yeah,
work?
yeah, I mean, so, yes, you can. I mean, venues wanna know not so much about how many people listen to your music, as how many people come to see you. So, I mean, you need to say,
Sure.
"I can go," when you get beyond, like, the local bar level and you're like, I'm gonna move into" because, I know the conversation kinda shifted a little bit, but, like, so there are venues that have there are spaces that have music, and there are music venues, right? So,
Yes,
like,
right.
right, they're different. So the restaurant bar that has a band in the back is not necessarily a music venue, right? The
Right.
the band is there for ambiance. So when you start moving into actual venues that like they are the primary focus is music,
Right.
but they wanna know how many people are you gonna bring to me?
Yeah.
And you need to say, "Yeah, I played these shows around this area, and I have ticket counts." If it's a hard ticket, means if there's like ticket sales, or or like I'm averaging 24 people a night, right? And
Yeah.
again, and that's what people want to know for venues. They want to know those hard numbers. Again, yes, having streaming numbers can support that, and artists can use those numbers. Say, oh, if I have 100,000 monthly listeners, right? And
Yeah.
then I know they're in Buffalo, they're in Detroit, right? You can dig down. There are platforms that will look at this and will get those analytics, and you can say, I'm going to play some shows in the area because this is where my fans are,
Right.
right? And that goes back to the virality thing. So like,
Yeah.
if you have a million fans, but there's 10, it's only 10 people here and 10 people there. No one's going to come see your show.
Right.
You need to have a critical mass.
As a case in point, my wife and I went to a band called Pigeons Playing Ping Pong, which is a funk cool band, a jam band, and we went to a venue in Fort Lauderdale that probably was a 500-person venue. I see now on Spotify, I pulled up, they have 122.2 thousand monthly listeners.
Okay, that's great. Yeah.
So 123,000 listeners, monthly listeners, and they're selling out 500 venue seats. Like, that I mean, that's not a hu that's not a, it's not even close to 1 to 1, 1 to 1, 2 to 1, 3 to 1. You need to rack up a lot of listeners to, kinda sell anything, it seems like.
Yeah, yeah, but again, like a band like that, I'm not familiar with them like that. Like they don't have day jobs, I would guess, right? So if you're getting a hundred,
Right.
you get 120,000 listeners, again, depending how big the band is, right? And again, keep in mind that's just on Spotify, right? So there are numerous platforms, they're
Sure.
global platforms, and that you can be making money. You can have a fan base in another country,
Yeah.
right? And in like Deezer's big, and mostly there's I mean there are streaming service in Asia, right? Tencent has their own streaming platform. So again, so they, so like so you might be having if you have 100,000 listeners on numerous platforms, and again,
Yeah.
depending how owns the rights to the music, and you're doing, you're playing a
But
couple
that
shows.
even makes the point even that makes the point even stronger that there's even less of a correlation between the amount of streams you have and butts in the seat.
Right,
That yeah, I
right,
mean, because if they're getting 100,000 on Spotify, 200,000 on Apple, X amount on YouTube, which is probably a lot more than both of them, and
right.
so that now you're at, let's say, 500,000, monthly listens or more. that means that for 500,000 listeners, you're selling out 500 seats a night. I mean, like, listen, you're obviously, again, you have this is your full-time job. You don't have a day job, but,
Yeah.
it shows how hard you have to work. It shows how
Right.
significant the numbers are.
Yeah, yeah, you know, and again, going to the live side, the idea is you wanna sell out every show.
Yeah,
So, you know, I mean, you know, the some of the artists I work for, like, you know, the idea is, like, I'd rather play 2 shows in the same venue 2 different nights, then go to a bigger venue, and then all of a sudden have it be maybe even a quarter empty. And
sure,
again, there and also there's a strategy. There's, you know, if you have a booking agent, and or it you know, even or if you don't, you know, most bands are their own booking agents. You're like, the idea is like, yeah, we went and we sold out, whether that's 50 or 500 or
sure,
50,000, but that is a huge, that's a very enticing thing to the next level. So we did, you know, you know, AEG or Live Nation, they own venues in every market. Like, we have our 400 seat room, we have our 800 seat room, we have our 1200, and you move up, right? And
yeah,
so, and then you try to find the ceiling, and hopefully the ceiling, hope, you know, obviously artists, you know, are going to find the ceiling, but it's a very long process. You start at 200, you start at, then you go to 500, then you go to 1,500, up, then you go to 3,000, up, didn't sell out, we go back, and, you know, you know, and then you keep going back, and so, and you're trying to maintain sellouts, because that is way more important than saying, I played a 1,000 seat room and had 400 people, than saying I played a 400 seat room and had 400 people. That's way better.
sure,
So,
sure, sure. Really interesting. Really, really, really cool stuff. Thank you so much, by the way. I just wanna say you are a are a freaking, an incredible source of information, and you're breaking all this down really, really beautifully, and you're hitting it out of the park
well,
as far as I'm concerned. Thank you
I'm
so much.
trying.
This is awesome.
I'm
Let's
trying.
talk about music now.
You mean the
Um,
songs itself? You mean we haven't been talking about, but you mean the songs itself.
I
So,
mean, the songs itself for a little bit, yeah, or
oh,
maybe even a little bit of the history
sure.
of I'm really interested in the background and the roots of a lot of this stuff, and
Okay.
rock is one of these genres that um, there's so much to talk about. Rock is a genre that, for me, I've noticed has pockets of manifestations. Like, you have Laurel Canyon rock, you have San Francisco rock, you have Jersey rock, you know, you have Alabama rock, you got, or, you know, Southern rock in general, that whole style, you know, and they're all so dramatically different, but they all kind of embody, you know, they're all embodied by rock. What do you what do you think about that, and what do you think rock is at its core, and why there's so many different manifestations of it?
So, um, so you mentioned the word Southern rock, and as Greg Allman once famously said, he's like, Southern rock is redundant because most of rock comes from the South, right?
Right.
So we as humans like labels, right? We so genres help us to figure out what things are. Again, yeah, the analogy I often use is, imagine going to a supermarket where the food was not organized by type, right? It was just like, it's all out there, right? So
Yeah.
there's no cereal aisle. Like, it's like some cereal is over here and some cereal's over there, and you're like, "Ah, it's confusing." And go to Target, pick it. Like, it's because we like to compartmentalize things. Like David Letterman's top 10 list. Like, we like things neatly organized. That's I think just a human characteristic. And so, as music expanded, right? Music's been going on for, I don't know, centuries, right? Thousands of years, right? Millennia. And so, as you know, if we look at the start of rock music, arbitrarily pick 1954, which is when Elvis decides to go in and make a half-assed recording at, Sun Records for his mom, and
Mhm.
then Sam Phillips ventures, "Make a note of that guy, he's pretty good," and then about a year later comes back, and he records "That's Alright Mama," and then he blows up. But Elvis didn't start that, right? He was influenced by R&B, and so as this music develops, and it's not quite R&B, it's not quite country, it was actually called rockabilly. So, you know, Elvis was basically a rockabilly artist for about a nanosecond, and then, you know, and he was. I mean, that's what it was. He was called the Hillbilly Cat. That was his
Right.
first nickname, and then, um, and then, and then that music becomes a little bit. It's not quite country. It's not quite R&B, but there's white Southern roots. There's black Southern roots. You know, there's northern urban appeal, right? So Muddy Waters,
Mhm.
takes music from the Delta, and then basically, you know, very reductive. He goes off to Chicago and
Yep.
trades in his acoustic
One
guitar
of the
for his
best things to ever happen in Chicago.
right, so, trades in his acoustic guitar for his electric guitar. So we have this. So then we have like these competing rocks, but it's all really similar, right? And then then obviously you have Chess Records and people like Chuck Berry who they start writing songs. Like Chuck Berry, again, a brilliant guitar player, but also like a highly regarded songwriter, right? I think so and that music influences the next generation. So you've got Chuck Berry, you got Buddy Holly, you got Elvis, you got Little Richard, you got Laverne Baker, who, the queen of R&B, more or less, sustains Atlantic Records again. Early Atlantic Records was an early pioneer in
Mhm.
record company, and of course there's Ray Charles, and then you have some doo-wop groups. And then obviously people spread then as radio, right, which was the predominant media at the time, right? It's that helps literally broadcast across the country, and
Yeah.
obviously there's only 4 or 5 TV stations, and then as artists are appearing on Ed Sullivan's show, and then obviously the Beatles in '64, you've got and so people in all these different pockets. So it's Laurel Canyon, or or it's not that people move to it's not people who are in Laurel Canyon, it's people move to Laurel Canyon, right?
Right.
And then you got teenagers in the South, teenagers in the North hearing this music and go, "Oh, that's what I want," right? And then there's also the social aspect to it too, where so this is post World War II, so you've got these
Yes.
these people who are basically what we become baby boomers, right? So they have time and leisure on their hand. They got time and
Uh-huh.
money, right? So there's no longer the threat of like there's not we there's no economic depression, there's no instant threat of World War II, right? You've got the Cold War looming, and so people are they people who are like teenagers, like they can get a paper route and they can go down and they have some time and they have money to spend on records. And then record labels then realize we have this new demographic we can market to. And so rock and roll is marketed specifically towards teenagers, right? And then there's all sorts of teenage movies that are like meant for teeny boppers. And so and again, so it's there's a lot of exploitation in a good way. Like
Predominantly white teenagers, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, yes and yes,
Because a
yeah,
lot of the roots that you mentioned came from a lot of black music, and I
of
and I
course,
and
yeah,
I do
yeah,
wanna emphasize
of course.
the yeah, for sure. Keep on going. I'm sorry to cut you
No, no,
off.
no, 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 absolutely, no, of course, right, so right, so, I was gonna say, like, obviously, then we have this incredibly racially segregated society, right, and when we could argue we still do, but, so the cultural side is like the breaking so, you get Brown versus Board of Education is '54, right, a landmark civil rights case, but it doesn't really
Same
desegregate.
year.
Yeah,
Same year as rock and roll was born too.
yeah, yeah, it doesn't really desegregate anything, but the one thing the radios are a really important part of this because like, as people have said, like you can't segregate the airwaves, even though there were stations that were geared
Mhm.
towards white audiences, there were stations geared toward black audiences, right? So, but like when you turn the radio on,
Right, you
you
can't
can
stop
choose
anyone from
to
listening to it, right.
right, yeah, yeah, right. It doesn't stop you, and so your parents could be very anti this or that music, but you have a transistor radio, you can sneak off to the beach or you can go outside to, and listen, and your parents want to listen to Sinatra, but you want to listen to Chuck Berry or whoever, right? Or vice
Yeah.
versa. It doesn't matter, right? So,
I would love to rebel by listening to Chuck Berry. Wouldn't that be cool?
right,
To be
yeah,
considered a rebel and listen to Muddy Waters or,
right,
be like, some of the real blues. I mean,
yeah. And yeah, there's definitely there's an intrigue. There's a little bit like, oh, white teens interested in black music.
yeah,
Or as and or I know black people interested in country music. But the thing is, the musics were way closer. They were always way closer than people thought.
mhm.
It wasn't that really. It was if you go back and listen to music from the '20s, right? There are white artists who are making string band music. There are black artists making string band music, and again because of the Jim Crow laws and segregation, right? Music is labeled hillbilly or race music, right? And so the hillbilly becomes country music, right? And
I
there's
believe
basically there's like white vernacular Southern music, and there's black vernacular Southern music,
right.
right? And so you get hillbilly and race, right? Race eventually becomes R&B, which becomes rock and roll, which becomes you know, and a lot of times, they sort of they always interweaving, and then sort of and then in the '50s when Elvis comes out, and seemingly out of nowhere, although if you know the history, like, it really was not out of nowhere. It was on a collision course. It just happened to he was the one that where it happened to collide. Again, he was not the first person to make this music, but again, because he was white and that
Yeah.
he had some privileges that others didn't have. Again, Elvis was
And he was
really
the
good.
manifestation of black music in a all white in a white world and white community and made it popular to a degree that I think, wouldn't have I mean, you could say that someone else could have made black music popular, as popular, but, like, Elvis did it at the end of the day, like,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah,
he caused all that reach.
yes, he did, right, and there's a line which I've never found it, but Sam Phillips says, if I could find a white kid that sings like Howlin' Wolf, I could make $1,000,000, right? And and if you listen to Elvis's early recordings, like his recordings in 54, 55, 56, he's really good. Elvis is really, really good. I mean, he sort of becomes a parody of himself, but
Yeah.
that's more or less because of his manager, the Colonel Tom Parker. But Elvis, like, he was, I do believe he was sincere in his appreciation
Huh?
of the music that he absorbed.
Sure.
So yeah, and so yeah, and so then again we have these various offshoots of then we have like the northern R&B style, which is more or less is Motown. Then we have the southern soul,
Right.
right, which is Stax and stuff, and also
Yeah.
Shoals, and James Brown at Gig King in Cincinnati, and then and then sort of like in the late '50s when sort of a lot of the first generation rock and roll sort of disappear. Elvis goes to the army, Buddy Holly dies,
Mhm.
right? Chuck Berry gets arrested, Jerry Lee Lewis decides to marry his cousin, right? So there's a
Little Richard had his own
vacuum.
problems too, right?
Right, yeah, Little Richard gives up because he again, super brilliant, move, like, he didn't like the deal he had with his record label, so he says it would take an active God to get out of his label, so he says so he goes into the he says, "I'm gonna go to the seminary," and it's like which is an active God, and he gets out of his record. It's super brilliant business move. Right, so, oh, yeah, all those artists sort of disappear,
Sure.
leaving a vacuum. Right,
Yeah.
and this is where, like, Frankie Valli comes in, and a lot of schlock rock, so, like, a lot of teeny bopper music because again, people
Yeah.
didn't know what to do, and then and that leaves space for and the surf rock comes in, and that leaves space, and so the Beatles kinda fill that vacuum, and sort of emerge in the US in '64.
Yeah.
You know
Beatles, Beach Boys, were and the Stones were active then? When was it but the Stones were much more blues influenced than they were like teeny bop. I think they had the plenty of the teeny bopper crowd famously, of course, but,
Yeah, 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 I
yeah.
mean, the one thing that I think people forget is that both the Beatles and the Stones and other bands of that era, the sort of the some of the British invasion bands, they were actually cover bands,
Yeah.
right? So, like, like, the first the Beatles don't release an album of full original music until Hard Day's Night, and
Yeah.
so there was 1 or 2 original songs on their first record, and then the Stones, most again, same thing. I think the I Wanna Be Your Lover, which is a song that Lennon and McCartney wrote, was the first Stones original song, although they didn't write it.
Yeah.
And so I mean, so they would never those bands would never make it today because there's no band gonna release, like, no label's gonna take a risk on a cover band, right? Just releasing covers, right? And then maybe one
Grateful
day,
Dead were also cover bands, I believe. I don't think that
yeah,
I
yeah,
think the problem with
agreed.
when they signed with Warner's was that they didn't have any they're like, "We have to tour because we don't have any songs to play any
Right,
songs
yeah,
to
yeah.
record."
I get it's like, yeah, so you're right, absolutely right, yeah. So, and so that model kind of existed through a good portion of the '60s where you again, a lot of bands become known as cover bands, and then, like, as they realized as the musicians in those bands realized the business is like, "Oh, the business isn't owning the songs," right? And so then they write more songs.
That's interesting. You think that that's what happened relative to them discovering their style of playing through covers? Meaning covers, for example, like, again, with the Stones or with the Dead or something like that, you could see that they had a lot of influences throughout the years, and the they started as a cover band, but the Grateful Dead realized that we're such a different sound than any of the songs that we're covering, Like, I mean, if you listen to Casey Jones, or you listen to Going Down the Road Feeling Bad, or you listen to any of these original songs, I Know You Rider, that were all covers, that are all became staples of their music. What makes them special were the way that the Dead or that the Stones or that the Beatles performed these songs. Twist and Shout was a cover. I guess that was a little bit more true to the original cover than, say, Casey Jones. Um, but I could see a record company taking a risk on a band that has a proven style, and even though they're covering, their music or their experience is fundamentally different than anything, and it seems to be working in its own right.
Well, so yes and no. So
Okay.
what you know what going back to the previous conversation. So the Stones had they put butts in seats. Right? So, the Beatles put butts in seats, right? So, at their gigs in Liverpool, their gigs at the Cavern Club, the Stones were playing in London, right? So, there was something about them. They had some charisma. They have charisma, right? And they excited the audience. Didn't matter. The labels probably didn't give one iota whether they're playing original songs
Right.
or cover songs, or how true they were to the original. I'm sure that the Beatles and the Stones tried to be as true as possible to the best of their abilities. Um, and and so, but it was the excitement of the audience, of the paying audience, that attracted the label.
Mhm.
And so, and the same thing with the Dead. I mean, you look at a lot of some of the early Dead set lists, right? They're playing Motown songs.
Mhm.
They're playing a bunch of bluegrass tunes, a bunch of jug band songs. They didn't know what they wanted to do, but they didn't know who they're going to be. It took them quite a while to figure that out. Again, if someone I'm a huge Grateful Dead fan. I got to see them about 25 times. Um,
Nice, really?
yeah. And, like, it's not really until, you know, um, Working Man's Dead and American Beauty where they really figure out their own style, right? Where, 'cause I mean, yes, they're writing original music, but they go from, like, this experimental freak out band, to like, "Oh, we now have these tidy, 3-minute, 4-minute songs."
Sure.
Yeah, again, that part of that is the influence John Barlow and
Yeah.
Nick Hunter, right, on the influence of the lyrics from Garcia and Weir respectively. So, so it also goes back to what's not happening now in the music industry is that bands like the Beatles or the Stones or the Who or the Dead or insert name band, like, labels allowed the bands to develop. They said, "We see potential here, and so we are gonna let you do some stuff, right? And as long as we're making forward progress, you're making some sales, there's butts in seats, we're gonna let you figure this out." Now, labels, you need to be fully or pretty closely fully realized. Like, you need to know who you wanna be as an artist from the moment if you start seeking the attention of labels, right?
Yeah.
So labels, they wanna know who, like, I have a vision. I wanna be, again, pick a style, pick a whatever, how you wanna look, that you need to become to the table fully vested and invested in your art. Where, again, I don't think the Grateful Dead would be signed to this day. I don't think
Right.
the Stones or the Beatles would be signed because they were cover bands, right? Again, I don't know when the date gets signed. Well, let's maybe 67, 66, 67. They're getting interest for sure, right? But they don't really become the band that they are, the band that they, when Garcia died, right? It took them 5 or 6 years to get there, and took them even more time to figure out. If you look at Grateful Dead set lists, up through to the mid 70s, but it is all insane. Like,
Yeah.
like
I love
the
those concerts. I love those,
yeah,
the early
right.
'70s concerts and the late '60s concerts are some of my
Yeah.
favorites for them.
Right, yeah, and again, I think
Pigpen, I love the blues. Pigpen I
yeah.
thought was added such a great blues sense, and I think that they didn't feel like they could carry those tunes without a player like him,
Well,
even
yeah.
though they perform them.
Well, Pigpen's a good point because, like, the band, they start off as basically, it was Mother McCree's Uptown Jug Champions, right? And they're a
Yep,
blues band, and
that's
then
right.
they move away from the blues, and Pigpen didn't really know what to do because
Yeah.
he was a good
He
singer.
died of alcoholism,
Right, yeah,
unfortunately.
and he was a mediocre keyboard player, and, like, so when they started doing all the freak out stuff, he'd just walk off stage, and he'd come in, they do Hard to Handle, whatever, or Mr. Charlie, whatever, and then he would just sort of be in the sidelines, right?
Yeah.
So they kinda started moving in a different direction, and he obviously he died, but, like, I don't think he would've if he didn't die, I don't think he would've lasted with them because I don't he wouldn't have fit 'cause
Yeah.
they moved in a different direction, so.
I wonder if they moved in a different direction because he died, though, because you could see that the styles of the band throughout the years. I don't want to just get too nitpicky about this, but the bands throughout the years, because the biggest thing that was always gone was their keyboard player, and the keyboard players tend to bring a lot of, Jerry Garcia brought a lot of country, Bob Weir brought a lot of that Western, cowboy type of music, and then, I mean, Keith or, what's his name? Oh, man, he had his own awesome solo career, Bruce Hornsby, or Tom Constantine or whoever it was, they all kind of brought their own flavor and influences to the band that I think would actually change the direction of the band's musical style many times throughout the like, if you listen set from 69 to 72 to 77 to 80 to 8 to the early 80s until the end of the career, it's a different genre band almost every time, and I'm sure that you can make the argument it's because of the actual rotations of players in it.
I'm gonna say no to that. I'm gonna say I don't agree
Okay.
with that. That's fine. It's like, no, it was Garcia's band, and they did what he wanted to do, and they, and yes, the style of the keyboard players certainly influenced. Like, Keith was really good. Brent was an amazing musician,
Brent was
right,
awesome.
amazing vocalist, and, Hornby was rather short-lived, but and again, but, it's yes, so when you saw the bands and, in those different iterations, of course, there was a different dynamic, but it was not you know, they were unfortunately, the keyboard players, they weren't interchangeable. They weren't interchangeable, again, the sound of the band, it's mixed around Garcia's guitar, and, and he led the band. He and we were not. I mean, there was simpatico, of course, but again, it was Garcia's band, I think.
Well, no question is Garcia's band, for sure. Okay, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So the and I guess it's go so I think what we're getting actually at almost more than anything and everything I have in common that I've noticed about all my conversations about rock is that rock is pretty much almost like a pop fusion type of sound where it draws from influences of local times, so local roots, whether that be blues, soul, bluegrass, country, whatever that might be, uh, and whatever's kind of pop with the time that connects with the youth. And that's kind of what I'm able to gather from the different sounds that are happening all over the place, as far as the location goes.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the problem is the term rock itself, right?
Okay.
So, you know when I teach a history of rock and roll class and, you know, I the first day of class, I will say, "What's your definition of rock?" And for the most part, it's gonna be a lot of people will write they when you think about rock, people in general envision a dude with a guitar,
Mhm.
and that has become the stereotypical image of rock, and, again, a lot of that has to there's a lot of other factors involved, in that conception, and and also the way the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame they sort of try to protect their idea of what rock is, right? I know they just announced the inductees
Yeah,
this
I
year,
just saw that
right? And
today.
right, and
Yeah.
including Wu-Tang Clan, and, and so because back in the day, Jan Wenner, who was involved in rock, like, he had a very narrow definition of rock. Rock meant primarily white dudes with guitars, right? And as rock progressed, right, from the early days with 55 to present, right, there are not as many rock bands anymore, right? There are very few rock bands, to be perfectly honest, right? Especially achieving any kind of chart success.
Yeah.
Foo Fighters, I guess, sure. And so you need to expand the definition because at some point they would have run out of Rock and Roll Hall of Fame would have run out of people to induct.
Right.
And so I like so Ice Cube from NWA, and I just Ice Cube, like, he's like, rock and roll when the NWA got inducted, people like, "How are they in there?" It's like, rock and roll is not a style, it's an idea, it's a stick it to the man, right? That and that is very much what rap has in common with rock, like, rock was very rebellious, rap
So
is very
cool.
rebellious.
So
And
interesting. I never thought about it like that, but that's true. I
and
love
so,
that.
I remember, like, when the Beastie Boys, who I love, got inducted, to rock and roll, people are like, "Oh my god, the Beastie Boys." Like, no, the Beastie Boys, they are the personification of rock and roll. They were a
Yeah.
fucking punk band. They're amazing musicians. It's people have a very narrow definition of rock, and so so if you think about rock as more of an attitude than a musical style, because, again, just as there's subcategories of rap or rock or rap or metal.
Yeah.
So, rock is this very big umbrella term, and then everything else kind of falls under that,
Yeah.
right? And then if you use the family tree, it gets very complicated, and obviously you can nitpick, whether it's like, oh, it's like South Jersey rock, or like, or or it's again, there's like Ohio rock, there is
Sure.
whatever it may be. So,
Yeah,
So
yeah, and I was also thinking actually while you were saying that because I feel like the country world has kind of become a little bit has developed a little bit of that attitude, in modern day music, and the other thing I was thinking when you mentioned earlier was that, like, you kinda have to have your career set and your idea of, like, what your music's gonna be and everything is, and then, you're ready kinda you don't have as much room to play around. I think it's interesting that you see artists kind of shuffling around like Jelly Roll or what's his name? What's his oh gosh, um, Post Malone, go from one world all the way to another, and then, you hear them talk about music and you find out about just how deep their appreciation of music in general goes, and that kind of embodies that same kind of stick it to the man, "Hey, you don't tell me what music I'm gonna play or don't tell me what kind of artist I am, I'll do what I feel like." What do you think about that?
yeah, yeah, I mean, that's true, most artists typically stay in one lane because it's I mean, you can be influenced by lots of stuff, but you risk alienating your fan base, right? So, when I think about people who are, visionary artists, I think about people like maybe like Miles Davis, who like did some
Mhm.
stuff, changed his mind, kept going. David Bowie, like, like there is no David Bowie sound. The only constant is David Bowie's voice, right? And so even Miss Swift, right? Started off as a country artist, and again, this was her move was very calculated. Yeah, but yeah, you mentioned Jelly Roll or others, like, yeah, it's like, yeah, I like rock, I like rap, I like country. They're th and to me as a musician, as a human, they all make sense, and so I wanna explore those ideas, but again, you don't get to do that unless you have success,
Mhm.
right? Again, it's like, think back when, Eric Clapton made his, like, most pure blues album was only after he won all those Grammys for the Unplugged record, and he comes back and drops, like, a very strict blues record. He doesn't do that unless he has less because he made so much money for himself and the label. He's like, "I'm doing this record, and you don't like it, move on."
Yeah.
So,
John Mayer comes to mind too,
yeah,
in that
right.
sense.
So yeah, so but yeah, again, going back, the music is there's way more connection between seemingly disparate styles like country, rap, and rock than there's differences,
Yeah.
right? And again, it's only audiences that live. I mean, not that audiences live in these boxes, but if you're a strict country person, like, oh my god, I can't believe that there's a that that this song sounds like rap. Like, well, of course, because that's what the artist is listening to. They're influenced. Morgan Wallen obviously clearly uses lots of trap beats in his
Mhm.
music. Post Malone's the kind of like a very much like a rocker guy. So, and there's a lot more affinity between country and rock, and there has been for a long time, where you take, like, Zach Brown, right, like, as a country artist, but, like, it's basically a rock band.
Yeah, he's yacht rock. He's a rocking Jimmy Buffett.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I don't like the term yacht rock, 'cause that is a name that no one ever used. So that was basically comes out of a Saturday Night Live skit.
Yeah,
So,
but
but
you don't think that it conjures up a pretty accurate picture of, like, most songs you can expect in that kind of genre pretty
no,
easily?
yeah, I'm not saying it's not accurate, but, like, I just had this conversation, with one of my classes about 2 or 3 weeks ago, like, talking about yacht rock. It is a thing that was applied after the fact.
Sure.
Like Michael McDonald, Donald Fagen, like, those guys hate that term. They're like, "We were not listening. We were not white dudes on a yacht."
Yeah.
Might be who's listening to this music, but that's not how that we as the creators were not that's not what we were trying to do or our target audience.
One of the most fun times that I had at any show I went to with my wife, our first like, 2 months after we got married, and we got married we dated for 7 months before we got married. Um, 2 months after we got married, we went to Jimmy Buffett in Orlando, and
There you go.
it was so much fun. It was and he died probably a year later, but he looked great, and the audience was anywhere from 18 to, like, 85, and everyone was wearing the Tommy Bahama shirts and the parrot hats, and it was such like a and that, I that I talked about, the live market. There's something that I think that is so incredible about group conscious experiences, like going to a show like that with we have something so emotionally strong in common with hundreds or thousands of people around you that, I can't imagine the industry is gonna go anywhere anytime soon, you know? I mean,
Well, of
people are
course,
afraid of
yeah.
AI, but I think that people are gonna look for it.
Well, if anything, Like, so people crave connection, right?
Yeah,
So so a concert, whether it's again, whether it's 50 people or 50,000, right? There's that communal experience of that connection. I was at that show, right? And with these other people, and and obviously now with the fact that you can take video, and or you can watch stuff on YouTube later on. Yeah, so I mean there is that. And yes, and AI is not going to does not necessarily create that connection for sure. So
yeah,
agreed.
yeah. It's fun. It's fun. Um, okay, there was one last question I wanted to ask you. Um, But now it is slipping my oh, yes, that's what I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask if you think the reason why rock bands have generally kind of disappeared or gone away is because I think if rock was a form of sticking it to the man and it got to such a point of enormous popularity, that almost it the initial incentive to create that rock music kinda goes away, doesn't it?
Uh, yes and no. I mean, I d I don't think rock is I think rock will probably make a comeback, right? Wait, rephrase the que I'm sorry, I lost my rephrase the question again,
The
sorry.
Yeah, I think that the root of rock is people feeling like they don't fit in or like they feel like they want to stick it to the man or express themselves in a unique way that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to, and then it gained enormous popularity. So it almost like that initial motivation
Okay,
doesn't
right.
seem to apply anymore, you know?
Well, no, I think the motivation applies. I think people I think the stick it to the man attitude is still there. I just think people are actually expressing it in through different genres. So I think, which is one of the reasons why I think rap is such a popular genre, because rap that is very much part of a rap ethos for sure.
Yeah,
Um, and, um But the, there's still, people are still selling guitars, Guitar Center is still in operation, right? There are still schools of rock and those type of things everywhere. So there's still, there's still a lot of interest in playing instruments. So not that rap doesn't play instruments, because they clearly do. The laptop and the turntable are very much instruments. Um, but it's just, I guess what rock needs is a new, like, champion, right? So, like, the Foo Fighters have been around for a long time, right? So, like, is it Geese? Are they the next band, or is
right.
it, um, you know, it's so, and is it, I guess also it all depends on the major labels, right? Taking a risk on a four-person band or whatever, a five-person band, as opposed to a single artist, right? The band is important, but who's in the band is not as important for the audience.
Yeah.
So, I mean, because there's more risk when you got more people in the band, you like then there's more people to make poor decisions, so to speak. So, uh, yeah, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Again, I'm optimistic about rock, but again, it is, there, or I think rock and country have sort of aligned themselves a lot more.
They have.
Even like, Luke Bryan
I'd call Billy Strings a voice like that, you know? I mean, I
yeah,
think because he also got that sensibility of it's Billy Strings, he has a consistent band, his fans know the band, right? Like, they have a personal relationship, though, but it's not he's n they're not Billy Strings and whatever it is, it's just him, and he's been gaining I mean, he's been incredible for
well,
getting
yeah, I
better
mean,
and better for
You
years.
you wanna talk about the communal experience, right? So, like, he's inherited the Grateful Dead fandom, right?
Yeah,
Right, he's an amazing guitar player, right? He barely sells any records. He's a bluegrass band, he plays the Madison Square Garden. I mean, it is literally an anomaly,
he's
right?
incredible.
He makes, I'm gonna guess he makes about 30 or $40 million a year, right? And he basically doesn't sell any records, or almost no records,
Sure.
right? It's all total, it's all the live experience. And again, a lot of that comes out of that is very much part of the communal experience is very much part of bluegrass and the bluegrass festival scene, which obviously where he grew up through.
Mhm.
And again, as the Grateful Dead have stop existed, and the Dead and Company have more or less stopped, right? So there's a lot of crossover, in that sort of jam band ethos, whether it's Fish or whatever, and Strings has inherited those, those some of those fans for sure.
Yeah, and what's fun is that he seems to be committed to the band to the album structure too, as in he still is putting out albums every X amount every 2 or 3 years, and even whether he's selling them or not, he's putting in the effort to create a full-length album and not dropping a couple of singles and calling that an album like what is pretty
Yeah.
popular to do these days.
Yeah. I mean, again, but that's also very, very part of the bluegrass tradition as
Culture.
well. I think but
Yeah.
again, like, if he wasn't selling out, every show he plays, right, he might be thinking more of a single strategy, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, 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 really interesting stuff. Chris, this was really a ton of fun. You're such a wonderful wealth of information. Thank you
oh,
so much.
Thanks, I appreciate it. So
Yeah, and I hope to have you back, in a couple of months maybe. We'll talk about the other topics of music we haven't hit, but I think this is awesome, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you
you're
so
welcome. Yeah,
much.
yeah, let me know when it's gonna drop so I can.
Absolutely. You got it.
Cool.
Okay, of
And
course.
have a good
Take care
day.
now.
Yes,
Bye
sir.
now.
Take care. Bye-bye.